I think just the qualities that are essential for somebody in a leadership role. I think it's important to grow into a particular role.
Power does not shift quietly inside the palace. One decision has reportedly redrawn the entire royal balance overnight, and William is no longer waiting his turn. That changed everything. It did not begin with an announcement. There was no formal statement, no sudden appearance before cameras, and no carefully worded press release to prepare the public for what had already begun unfolding behind palace walls. Instead, the shift happened quietly, in the way the most consequential royal decisions often do. In the early days of 2026, something changed in the internal rhythm of the monarchy. Those closest to the institution began to notice it first. A difference in tone, a tightening of structure, a subtle but unmistakable sense that authority was no longer being deferred, but actively exercised. At the center of that shift was Prince William. For years, he had been preparing for the role he is destined to inherit. He had observed, learned, and adapted, understanding that leadership within the royal family is not simply granted by title, but demonstrated through action. But what unfolded in this moment suggested that preparation had given way to execution. According to sources familiar with the situation, a series of private decisions were made following mounting tensions within the extended royal circle. These tensions, long contained beneath the surface, had reached a point where they could no longer be managed through quiet tolerance. William's response was not impulsive. It was deliberate. He reportedly moved to establish clear boundaries around who holds influence within the royal structure and who does not. This was not framed as a personal conflict. It was framed as a necessary step to protect the integrity of the institution. And at the heart of that recalibration was a controversial outcome. Camilla's extended family, who had gradually become more visible within royal proximity, found their access quietly reduced. Invitations became more selective, appearances more controlled. The informal space they once occupied began to narrow. To the outside world, nothing appeared dramatic. But inside the palace, the message was unmistakable. Lines had been drawn. Those familiar with the decision describe it not as exile in the traditional sense, but as a repositioning. A clear signal that proximity to the monarchy does not equate to authority within it. That influence is not inherited through association, but earned through role and responsibility. For William, this was about more than one family or one moment. It was about control, about ensuring that the monarchy he will one day lead remains defined by structure, not blurred by overlapping circles of influence. What makes this decision so significant is not just what it changed, but what it revealed. Because for the first time, William was not simply preparing to lead, he was already doing it. The hidden tensions behind palace walls, long before any visible shift occurred, the tension had already been building. It did not emerge suddenly. It did not announce itself through open disagreement or public conflict. Instead, it developed slowly, almost imperceptibly, beneath the carefully maintained surface of royal unity. For those outside the palace, everything appeared stable. Engagements continued. Appearances were coordinated. Smiles were exchanged in front of cameras. But behind that composed exterior, a different reality was taking shape. Within the royal household, structure is everything. It defines not only who holds authority, but how that authority is expressed. It governs access, influence, and proximity. And when that structure begins to shift, even slightly, it creates a ripple effect that can be felt across the entire institution. In recent months, those closest to palace operations began to notice subtle changes. Not dramatic enough to draw public attention, but significant enough to register internally. There were differences in who was present at certain gatherings, differences in who was consulted during planning, differences in the tone of internal conversations. These were not isolated occurrences, they formed a pattern. At the center of that pattern was the growing presence of Camilla's extended family. Their connection to the monarchy, while legitimate through her position, had gradually evolved into something more visible, more involved, more integrated into spaces that had traditionally been reserved for senior working royals. For some within the palace, this evolution was seen as natural, a reflection of changing times, a sign that the monarchy was adapting to a more modern, inclusive framework. But for others, it raised concerns. Because inclusion, within a system built on hierarchy, must be carefully managed. There is a difference between being connected to the institution and being part of its operational core. And when that distinction becomes unclear, it can lead to confusion about roles and expectations. Reports from those familiar with internal dynamics suggest that this confusion had begun to surface in subtle ways. Moments where protocol felt less defined, situations where lines of authority seemed blurred, interactions where the usual balance of deference and familiarity did not quite align. None of these moments were significant on their own, but together they created a sense that something was shifting, and that shift did not go unnoticed by Prince William. As someone preparing to take on the highest level of responsibility within the monarchy, he is acutely aware of how internal dynamics shape external perception. He understands that the strength of the institution depends not only on public image, but on internal cohesion. When that cohesion begins to weaken, even slightly, it must be addressed. Those close to William describe a period of careful observation. He did not act immediately. He did not respond to individual incidents in isolation. Instead, he watched how these dynamics unfolded over time, looking for patterns rather than reacting to single moments. What he saw, according to insiders, was a gradual expansion of influence that was not anchored in defined roles. And that, for William, was a problem, because influence without structure can lead to instability. The monarchy has survived for centuries, not by accident, but by maintaining a clear framework of authority. Every role is understood, every responsibility is defined, and while the system evolves, its core principles remain intact. When individuals begin to operate within that system without a clear place in its structure, it creates ambiguity, and ambiguity is something the monarchy cannot afford. There were also reports of growing discomfort among certain senior figures, not openly expressed but quietly acknowledged in private conversations. A sense that the traditional balance was being tested, that the lines which once felt fixed were becoming less certain. These concerns did not manifest as direct opposition. They manifested as hesitation, a pause before decisions, a reconsideration of invitations, a careful evaluation of who should be present in particular spaces. These are the kinds of signals that indicate deeper tension, and for William, they confirmed what he had already begun to suspect, that the issue was not a single event or individual. It was structural. It was about the integrity of the system itself. This is what made his eventual response inevitable. Because once a pattern becomes clear, inaction is no longer a neutral choice. It becomes a risk. And for someone in William's position, risk to the institution is not something to be taken lightly. The hidden tensions had reached a point where they could no longer remain hidden. They required resolution. And as those tensions continued to build, it became clear that the next step would not be subtle. It would be decisive. Camilla's family and the struggle for influence. To understand the depth of the tension, it is necessary to look closely at the position occupied by Camilla's family within the royal structure. Their presence has never been entirely straightforward. It exists in a space that is both connected and separate, influential yet unofficial, visible but not formally defined. Unlike the core members of the monarchy, Camilla's family did not grow into their roles through generations of royal expectation. Their connection to the institution came later, shaped by Camilla's relationship and eventual rise to queen consort. This distinction has always carried implications, even when it was not openly discussed. Because within the monarchy, lineage does more than define identity. It defines instinct. Those raised within the system understand its boundaries without needing explanation. They know when to step forward and when to step back. They recognize the weight of hierarchy and the importance of preserving it, even in moments that appear informal to outsiders. For those who enter the royal sphere later in life, that understanding must be learned, and learning does not always happen evenly. Over time, Camilla's family became more present within royal spaces. Initially, this presence was subtle: appearances at select events, inclusion in certain private gatherings, occasional visibility that reflected their connection to the queen consort without disrupting the established structure. But as Camilla's position solidified, so did the visibility of those around her. This shift was gradual, but noticeable to those who pay attention to royal dynamics. Invitations became more frequent. Interactions became more familiar. The line between private family connection and public royal association began to blur. For some, this evolution was entirely expected. It reflected a monarchy that was adapting to modern realities, where blended families and extended connections are part of everyday life. It suggested a softer, more inclusive approach to what had once been a strictly defined institution. But for others, the shift raised questions. Because the monarchy does not operate like an ordinary family, it operates within a framework that relies on clarity, on defined roles, on an understanding that proximity does not automatically translate into authority. When that distinction becomes unclear, tension follows. Reports from within palace circles suggest that this tension did not appear overnight. It developed through a series of small moments, each one seemingly insignificant on its own, but collectively pointing toward a larger pattern. There were instances where Camilla's family members were present in settings traditionally reserved for senior royals, moments where their level of involvement appeared to extend beyond what had previously been customary. Situations where their familiarity within certain spaces raised quiet questions among those accustomed to a more structured approach. None of these moments were publicly acknowledged, but they were observed. And in an environment like the palace, observation carries weight. Those who have spent years navigating royal protocol are highly attuned to shifts in behavior and presence. They notice who is included. They notice who is consulted. They notice when the balance begins to change. What began as inclusion gradually started to resemble influence. And influence, when it is not clearly defined, can become a source of friction. There is also the matter of perception beyond palace walls. The public does not always distinguish between official roles and informal proximity. When individuals appear alongside senior royals, when they are seen within royal settings, they are often perceived as part of the institution itself. This creates a secondary layer of complexity, because perception shapes narrative, and narrative shapes trust. If the structure of the monarchy appears inconsistent, even subtly, it can lead to questions about its stability, about who holds authority, about how decisions are made. For a system that depends heavily on public confidence, these questions are not insignificant. Within this context, Camilla's family found themselves at the center of a delicate balance. Their connection to the monarchy provided access, but that access existed within boundaries that were not always explicitly stated. Navigating those boundaries requires precision. It requires an awareness not just of what is permitted, but of what is appropriate. And according to those familiar with internal discussions, this is where the strain began to show. There were moments where actions, though not overtly inappropriate, felt misaligned with expectation. Instances where tone or presence did not fully reflect the level of formality associated with certain settings. Situations where the distinction between personal familiarity and institutional respect became less clear. These were not acts of defiance. They were signals of difference, a difference in perspective, a difference in how the monarchy is understood by those within it and those connected to it. For some members of Camilla's family, the monarchy may have appeared as an extension of personal life, a space where relationships could be expressed more freely, where formality could occasionally give way to familiarity. But for those raised within the institution, that perspective can feel destabilizing, because the monarchy is not simply a family, it is a system. And within that system, every interaction contributes to its overall coherence. As these differences became more apparent, they began to intersect with the broader concerns already forming within the palace. Concerns about structure, about clarity, about maintaining the integrity of roles in an environment that was becoming increasingly complex. Prince William, observing these developments, did not see them as isolated or incidental. He saw them as part of a larger shift, a shift that, if left unaddressed, could gradually alter the balance of influence within the monarchy. This is what transformed the situation from a matter of personal dynamics into a matter of institutional importance. Because once influence begins to expand without clear definition, it can create uncertainty about where authority truly lies. And for someone preparing to lead the monarchy into its next phase, that uncertainty is not acceptable. The struggle for influence, therefore, was never about confrontation. It was about definition, about establishing with clarity who operates within the core structure of the monarchy and who remains connected to it from the outside. It was about reinforcing the idea that while relationships matter, they do not override roles. And as this realization took hold within the palace, it set the stage for a response that would not only address the immediate tension, but reshape the boundaries moving forward. Because in the monarchy, influence is never left undefined for long. It is either clarified or it is corrected. William steps forward and takes control. There comes a point in every institution where observation is no longer enough. A point where patterns have been studied, signals have been interpreted, and the only remaining question is whether leadership will act or continue to wait. For Prince William, that point had arrived. He had spent months watching the subtle shifts inside the royal structure. He had noted the gradual expansion of influence, the softening of boundaries, and the quiet discomfort among those who understood how the system was meant to function. He had allowed those dynamics to reveal themselves fully, not out of hesitation, but out of discipline. Because William does not act without clarity, and once that clarity was established, his approach changed. Those familiar with the internal response describe it not as a sudden move, but as a series of deliberate decisions, each one measured, each one designed to restore definition where it had begun to blur. There was no dramatic confrontation, no moment of public declaration. Instead, control was asserted through structure. Access was the first area to shift. Invitations to certain high-level engagements became more selective. Guest lists were reviewed with greater scrutiny. Appearances that once allowed for broader inclusion were quietly adjusted to reflect a more traditional framework. These changes were not announced. They did not need to be. Within the palace, such adjustments are immediately understood. Presence began to carry meaning again. Who stood where? Who was included in which setting? Who participated in what capacity? These details, often invisible to the public, formed the foundation of royal hierarchy. And under William's direction, that foundation was being reinforced. Communication followed. Sources indicate that William initiated a series of private conversations with key figures connected to the situation. These were not casual discussions. They were precise, focused, and anchored in principle. He did not speak in vague terms. He spoke with clarity about expectations. He emphasized that the monarchy operates within defined roles, that those roles are not flexible based on proximity or personal connection, and that maintaining the integrity of those roles is essential to the institution's survival. This was not framed as a personal criticism. It was framed as a structural necessity. Those who participated in these conversations reportedly noted a shift in William's tone. It was not emotional, but it was firm in a way that left little room for interpretation. He was no longer positioning himself as a future leader observing from the side. He was acting as one, and that distinction mattered. Because, for the first time, his authority was not implied. It was exercised. One of the most significant aspects of his approach was its consistency. The changes were not isolated to a single event or individual. They were applied across multiple areas of royal activity. This ensured that the message was not seen as a reaction, but as a policy, a recalibration of how the institution would function moving forward. Within this recalibration, Camilla's extended family felt the impact most directly. Their presence within certain royal spaces became less frequent. Opportunities for informal engagement were reduced. The level of access that had gradually expanded over time began to contract. This was not presented as exclusion. It was presented as alignment. A return to a structure where influence corresponds to defined responsibility. For William, this distinction is critical. He understands that the monarchy cannot operate effectively if its boundaries are unclear. That every individual within its orbit must understand not only their connection to the institution, but also their place within it. Without that understanding, the system risks becoming fragmented, and fragmentation is something he is determined to prevent. There is also a strategic dimension to his actions. William is acutely aware of how the monarchy is perceived beyond palace walls. He knows that public confidence is shaped not only by major events, but by the consistency of the institution's internal logic. When that logic appears stable, trust is reinforced. When it appears uncertain, questions begin to surface. By stepping forward in this way, he is sending a signal, not just to those within the royal circle, but to those observing from the outside. That leadership is active, that structure is intact, and that the future of the monarchy is being guided with intention. Those closest to him suggest that this moment represents more than a response to a specific situation. It represents a transition in how William approaches his role, a shift from preparation to implementation. He is no longer simply learning how to lead, he is leading, and perhaps most importantly, he is defining the terms of that leadership. Not through public declarations, but through decisions that reshape the internal dynamics of the institution. Decisions that clarify who holds influence, who operates within the core structure, and how the balance between tradition and modernity will be managed. In doing so, William is establishing something that extends beyond the immediate circumstances. He is setting a precedent, one that suggests the monarchy under his future reign will not drift into ambiguity. It will be structured, it will be deliberate, and when necessary, it will be enforced. Because for William, leadership is not about waiting for authority to arrive. It is about recognizing when it is already required and acting accordingly. The fallout inside the royal circle. The response did not end with William's decisions. In many ways, that was only the beginning. Inside the royal circle, the effects of his actions began to unfold almost immediately, though not in ways the public could easily detect. There were no visible confrontations, no dramatic scenes, no statements hinting at internal discord. Instead, the fallout moved quietly through the same channels where influence had once expanded. And for those within the system, it was impossible to ignore. The first signs appeared in the atmosphere itself. Conversations became more measured, interactions more deliberate. There was a noticeable shift in how individuals approached shared spaces, as if an unspoken understanding had taken hold. Something had changed, and everyone was adjusting to it in real time. For members of Camilla's extended family, the adjustment was particularly significant. Where there had once been a growing sense of ease within certain royal environments, there was now a renewed awareness of boundaries. Invitations that had previously felt routine became less predictable. Access that had seemed to widen began to narrow. This was not communicated directly. It did not need to be. Within the palace, changes in access speak louder than any formal explanation. They signal position, they define relevance, and they make clear, without confrontation, where individuals stand within the structure. Those close to the situation suggest that the reaction from Camilla's side of the family was not immediate resistance, but rather quiet recalibration, an understanding that something had shifted at a level that could not be easily challenged. Because while influence can expand gradually, it can also be reduced just as deliberately. And when that reduction is guided by someone in William's position, it carries a weight that is difficult to contest. At the same time, the broader royal circle began to respond in its own way. Senior members, long accustomed to the traditional structure, appeared to settle more firmly into their roles. There was a sense, according to insiders, that clarity had been restored, that the ambiguity which had been quietly building was now being addressed. For some, this brought a level of relief, because uncertainty within the monarchy does not remain isolated. It affects how decisions are made, how responsibilities are distributed, how the institution presents itself both internally and externally. With William's intervention, those uncertainties began to resolve. But resolution does not come without consequence. There were reports of subtle tension in private settings. Not open disagreement, but a careful navigation of relationships that had become more defined. Individuals who once operated with a degree of informality now appeared more cautious, more aware of how their actions might be interpreted within the recalibrated structure. This caution extended beyond Camilla's family. It influenced the entire dynamic of the royal household. Because once boundaries are reinforced, everyone becomes more conscious of them. Every invitation, every interaction, every appearance is viewed through a clearer lens, one that reflects not only personal connection, but institutional role. This shift also had implications for Camilla herself. As queen consort, her position requires a careful balance between personal relationships and public duty. The adjustment of her family's access inevitably intersects with that balance, creating a situation that must be navigated with precision. Those familiar with palace dynamics suggest that Camilla has approached the situation with restraint. There have been no public indications of conflict, no attempts to challenge the adjustments made. Instead, the response has been measured, aligning with the broader expectation that internal matters remain internal. But even in silence, the impact is felt, because when one part of the royal circle shifts, it affects the whole. The fallout, therefore, is not defined by confrontation. It is defined by realignment. a process in which roles are clarified, expectations are reinforced, and relationships are adjusted to fit within a structure that has been deliberately reasserted. For Prince William, this outcome appears intentional. His goal was not to create division, but to restore order, to ensure that the monarchy operates within a framework that is clear, consistent, and sustainable. And in many ways, that goal has been achieved. But the process of realignment is ongoing, because structures, once reinforced, must be maintained. And as the royal family continues to move forward, the effects of this moment will remain present, shaping interactions in ways both visible and unseen. What began as a quiet decision has now become a defining shift, one that will continue to influence the internal balance of the monarchy long after the immediate tension has faded. A new era of royal power begins. What remains after the tension settles is not silence, but clarity. The events that unfolded behind palace walls were never meant to be public spectacle. They were not designed to generate headlines or provoke open reaction, yet their significance lies precisely in how quietly they reshaped the structure of the monarchy. Because when power shifts without noise, it often signals something far more permanent. For Prince William, this moment marks more than a response to internal tension. It marks a transition. For years, he has existed in a position defined by anticipation, the future king, the next in line, a role shaped by preparation rather than execution. But what has now become evident is that waiting is no longer the defining feature of his position. He is no longer standing at the edge of authority. He is exercising it. This shift does not come with a crown or a formal declaration. It comes through action, through decisions that alter how the institution operates in real time. And in doing so, William has demonstrated a leadership style that is both deliberate and controlled. He does not seek confrontation. He seeks structure, and that distinction is critical. Because the monarchy, in its modern form, faces a challenge unlike any it has encountered before. It must evolve without losing its identity. It must adapt without dissolving the framework that has sustained it for centuries. And it must do so in an environment where every action is scrutinized, interpreted, and amplified. This requires a different kind of leadership, not one driven by reaction, but one guided by principle. William's approach suggests that he understands this deeply. His decisions have not been about asserting dominance, but about reinforcing clarity, about ensuring that the institution remains anchored in a structure that defines roles, responsibilities, and limits. The recalibration of influence within the royal circle is part of that process. It signals that the monarchy will not drift into informality simply because the world around it is challenging. That while it may embrace certain aspects of modern life, it will do so on its own terms, within boundaries that protect its core identity. This is what defines the beginning of a new era. Not a dramatic overhaul, but a controlled evolution. An era where authority is exercised earlier, more visibly within internal dynamics, and with a clear intention to preserve stability. There is also a message embedded in this shift, one that extends beyond the immediate circumstances. That proximity to power is not the same as power itself. That connection to the monarchy does not override its structure, and that influence must align with responsibility if it is to be sustained. For those within the royal circle, this message has already been received. Roles are now more clearly understood, boundaries more firmly established. The space for ambiguity has narrowed, replaced by a framework that is being actively maintained. For the public, the change may appear less visible, but over time, its effects will become more apparent. In the consistency of appearances, in the clarity of roles, in the way the monarchy presents itself as a unified institution, rather than a collection of overlapping relationships. This is the outcome William appears to be working toward. A monarchy that is both modern and structured, flexible but not undefined, evolving but not uncertain. And perhaps most importantly, a monarchy that is led with intention long before the moment of formal succession arrives. Because leadership, as this moment has shown, does not begin with a title, it begins with action. And in taking that action, William has signaled that the future of the monarchy is no longer a distant concept. It is already taking shape, quietly, deliberately, and with a clarity that leaves little room for doubt about who will define it. What began as a quiet shift has revealed something far greater. Power inside the monarchy is no longer waiting to be handed over. It is already being shaped. The real question now is whether this new balance will hold, or if deeper tensions are still waiting to surface behind palace doors.